Friends, I should really try to abbreviate what I'm going to say tonight. There's so many important subjects that we must take up. Venezuela, Boston, May Day. What I'm doing essentially is opening a discussion. Far, far from closing it. We'll continue it tomorrow. The first thing I want to just state emphatically is what the problem is and what part of the solution is. The problem, the biggest problem for the working class movement is not necessarily the size of this or that demonstration or even the number of organized workers. Those things are very important. The biggest problem for the working class movement is the ideological struggle. It usually is, most of the time it is, and especially now that we're in this gravest crisis of the capitalist system in history. And what do we have with that? We have the hegemony of bourgeois ideology. The working class movement, the left, with very few exceptions, is at the mercy of bourgeois ideology. And it's paralyzing us in the struggle. It affects everything. Part of the solution is for our party, some of us anyway, Workers' World Party, to prepare to open up a struggle for an ideological reawakening in our party, in the working class movement, on the left, and in broader sections of our class. However long it takes, whatever must be done to do that, we have to do that, because I believe, and I'm not alone, that ultimately doing so will be decisive in the working class's ability to defend itself. The ideological struggle has been so diminished for so many years based on so many things. And a lot of people think it's esoterical. Well, what's really going on? That's a conversation we can have over a cup of tea or a beer. But let's do something that, we can feel right now. The ideological struggle is always there. You cannot escape it, even when it's invisible. It's in Boston. Anybody who is concerned about the bourgeois state, Lenin again, Lenin on the state, they look and see how the state is using this, whatever the hell happened, and whoever did it, how they're using it to garner more strength, maybe even to do a dry run of whatever. They've shut down Boston, shut down the transit system, shut down traffic. Nobody can leave their homes. This is not a small city. And what you have is tanks and Land Rovers and bombers flying over ground. It's a full mobilization of the military. It's truly harrowing and frightening. And if you know about the state, and you know that it's not neutral, but it's an instrument of bourgeois repression, that's right, then, well, that's ideological. That's right. Same is true with Venezuela. There's so many ideological issues in that struggle. The counter-revolutionary and neo-fascist types, from what I've heard, are trying to overturn the elections. And of course, we defend the elections. We defend the movement. But while doing so, we never forget, as communist revolutionaries, that the elections were bourgeois elections. They were imposed on Venezuela by the bourgeoisie, both in and outside of Venezuela. They basically said, you have to do this in order for recognition. See? It's not necessarily the case that in every case they would have had to do this. Maybe seizing the factories and other things at some point and arming the masses would be the best way to proceed if they were ready, if circumstances and the leadership were prepared for that. So we have no illusions about the elections. They're bourgeois elections, and bourgeois elections are designed to serve the interests of the bourgeoisie. It's all the more impressive, if you want to look at it, that they prevailed in a bourgeois election when you consider how the bourgeoisie tried to use this, essentially the passing of Chavez and the new situation, to stop them. Why are the workers around the world, from Greece to France to here, everywhere you can think of, why is there struggle against austerity and unemployment and all of the terrible attacks that they're facing? Why isn't it bigger? Why isn't it more revolutionary? Why isn't it coordinated on a region-wide, at least, if not a worldwide basis? Why aren't they cross-border general strikes with no end? And the seizure of factories? And a strong militant fight back that says, no, this is not a protest, we're throwing down. It's not because the attacks are not grave enough. They need that kind of response. Why is there a feeling or a level of consciousness in the working class, certainly in the leadership of the working class, that, well, you know, all of the detachments of our class, not only cross borders or cross languages and cultures, but even within a country, if you want to limit it to that geography. You know, why is it, well, everybody's on their own? Sure, we'll send you a message of solidarity, but basically your strike of school bus drivers here, you know, and people who help the children on the bus, yeah, we sent out a press release, but you're on your own. You're on your own against a strike that you've been forced into to break your union and lower the wages. You're on. Why is that? This is a huge question, sisters and brothers. A lot of trade unionists think about it, and it probably drives them to substance abuse, or they throw up their hands. See? But it's critical to ask it now because it forces us to go back. It's because there is a level of consciousness in the working class movement. It certainly is there amongst the most conservative elements, but it's there even amongst the most progressive, radical elements to a certain extent, off and on like a light bulb. And that is that their goal in their struggle has become limited. Defend the interests of the members of our union. Hold on to what we have. Be concerned about our union. Sure, what's happening to another union or some other sector of workers somewhere else, we're concerned about that. But primarily we're concerned about what's happening to us, no matter who else is. And this kind of consciousness is music to the ears of the bourgeoisie. It's music to the ears of the bankers, you see. Because is that not their goal? To divide us. Is that now how they organize? That's how they organize labor, the relationship of labor to production. To, as much as possible, have workers competing against each other. And in this consciousness, there is the explicit or implicit hope amongst the leaders in the working class movement that maybe we'll have some capitalist economic stability. And if we have that capitalist economic stability, maybe that will equal stability in terms of my working conditions. You know, if they don't go up, at least they'll stay the same, or they'll go up a little bit year after year. But think about it. With that kind of consciousness, the working class movement becomes attached to the notion, to the hope of capitalist stability, which is an illusion. This is not a big criticism of the working class movement or anyone in it. It's a thumb analysis of a problem. See? It's a conservatizing kind of consciousness. It makes you want to hold on to the status quo. What happens when capitalist stability is no longer available? When You're being thrown out of your job by the thousands and even by the millions, and your homes being closed, and austerity measures are getting, more draconian all over the world. What happens when capitalism enters a new stage of imperialism, its final stage of decay and falling apart, and you have more or less a permanent global crisis of capitalist overproduction? The attacks on the working class aren't up and down. They intensify. They tend to go up. And they tend to be on a global basis because the bourgeoisie, even with its differences, is more organized than the working class movement is, if you look at it on a world basis. That's just a cold fact. What happens when the way that you've been proceeding, the way that you've been fighting, no longer works because of this new situation? We should put this in some historical perspective. If I had time, I would say more tonight, but maybe we can talk about it if comrades and friends want to tomorrow at the class. And as I said, this is just the beginning. I know many comrades are going to be giving classes that touch on this, especially Fred, I think, is going to be giving a class on the working class a couple of weeks or a month down the road, which will take up some of the same things. See? What do I mean by historical perspective? This consciousness that I'm trying to describe in the working class movement, there's a label for it, there's a word for it, for those who know. Generally speaking, it's opportunism. It's not a new thing. It's been around for a long time. And there are lots of reasons for it, but I'll give you one general reason for it, and that is that over the past century of class struggle in the world, going back to the Russian Revolution, every struggle, especially every big struggle, the 30s, the struggle or the circumstances that brought about the Russian Revolution and what happened in other countries after that. I'm not going to mention all of them. We went through one about a quarter of a century ago, and that was the collapse of the Soviet Union. All of these global class struggles that tend to strengthen capitalism's hand, economically, politically, strategically, and weaken the working class, they also tend to diminish the revolutionary program of the working class. The maximum program, it used to be called, and that is smash capitalism onward to the socialist revolution, which, believe it or not, at times, and still is, but at times historically was very popular. And you could find a banner or leaflet not just being held by a few people, but being embraced by large numbers of workers who were for this, and they talked about it. These battles where capitalism prevails diminishes this maximum program to the extent that after a while, even the better elements in the working class movement who may give lip service to it, I shouldn't say that, that sounds demeaning, who in their heart want it, they don't see it on the horizon, not in their lifetime. And so it's, what's that expression? It's taken off the table. Doing away with capitalism, socialist revolution, that's taken off the table. At best, the unforeseeable future for our children, our grandchildren, best we can do now is just fight to hold on to what we have or get a little bit more. And there's nothing wrong with that. Fighting to hold on to what you have and fighting to get a little bit more is central to the purpose of labor unions. And it will be until we have socialism and communism. And it's a good progressive thing. But when you get a crisis like this, how can you defend yourself if you're not trying to bring back some of that maximum program, some of that revolutionary program, that revolutionary anti-capitalist perspective, and how that might affect your tactics, your strategy, and even the geographic level upon which the working class is fighting back. This has everything to do with the ideological struggle. I want to read a little bit of what Marx said about it. It's part of the reading material that you have, and Comrade Fred Goldstein included some of these quotes with his own helpful additions in Low Age Capital. And if you can, you should read that, especially if you're coming to the class tomorrow. This is Marx. I'm not reading the whole thing. I'm just a couple of selected things. If trade unions are required for the guerrilla fights between capital and labor, they are still more important as organized agencies for superseding the very system of wage labor and capital rule. Take that in. That's about their past. Their present. Wow. Too exclusively bent upon the local and immediate struggle with capital, the trade unions have not fully understood their power of acting against the system of wage slavery itself. Therefore kept too much aloof from the general social and political movements. Wow. He said this at a conference of the First International in 1866. And it just bristles with relevance, right here in 2013. Their future. Sam Marcy has his own interpretation. Sam Marcy, the founder of Workers' World Party and its longtime chairman until his passing some time ago, wrote one of the groundbreaking books on, high-tech, low pay. And he has his own version, and I might bring some of that tomorrow, but we'll see. This is Marx on the future of trade unions. Apart from their original purpose, they must now learn to act deliberately as organizing centers for the working class in the broad interest of its complete emancipation. They must aid every social and political movement tending in that direction, considering themselves as acting as the champions and representatives of the whole working class. They cannot fail to enlist the non-society, which what they call the unemployed, into their ranks. They must look carefully after the interests of the worst paid trades, such as agricultural workers, rendered powerless by exceptional circumstances. They must convince the world at large that their efforts, far from being narrow and selfish, aim at the emancipation of the downtrodden millions. What's important to say here is that we're clear that the trade unions are not a substitute for what we're trying to do, build a revolutionary workers' party, Workers' World Party. And they have a mission in addition to the emancipation of the downtrodden millions, which is the more meat and potatoes trade unionism that many of us are familiar with. But if it's limited to that, especially in the crisis that we have now, they cannot win without an ideological reawakening. Now, even the labor movement in this country, which for many years has been so moderate and conservative and tied to the Democratic Party, and that's not about to change, although sudden things can happen, we'll see. The crisis has pushed them. They've been losing members, even though the Democratic Party is in the White House and they have at least one house of the Congress, still you see what happened in Michigan, the anti-labor laws, Michigan of all places, And the labor leaders are knocking their heads against the wall. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And they had what I read was a contentious, animated executive committee meeting not too long ago, where the head of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, said, we just got to break out. We can't just be defending the old ways. They'll pit the system, the corporations will pit us against each other. And we have to find a way to involve all of those who are not in the labor movement, including the unemployed, including undocumented workers, including day laborers, including taxi drivers, and on and on. We have to find a way to including the people who clean houses and watch after rich people's children or affluent people's children who usually don't have the benefit, even in a narrow basis of unionization. We have to find a way to bring them all in. See? And so we must remake the labor movement so it's not this closed place, but it's an open place. And we have to strengthen our ties with the anti-racist movement and the women's movement and so forth and so on. Some of this is not new, but he was saying it with a new passion born of fear and crisis. And as I was reading some of this, I was thinking how much of it sounded like what Marx was advising labor leaders to do more than 150 years ago, 160, 70 years ago. But there's one problem. I have quotes from Trump. Maybe I won't read all of them in the sake of time, but a couple of them. The Federation structure of the AFL-CIO was designed mostly to protect unions from one another, to protect jurisdiction, and to prevent raiding. But the task ahead of us is too big for a fragmented and compartmentalized labor movement. So we must change. We need a labor movement that can truly act collectively to represent all workers everywhere. The AFL-CIO has reformed its old field service staff, now into a campaign staff, shifting from business unionism, that dirty word that's servicing the business union servicing model, to a more movement-building social unionism, engaging with union members and families. For example, Working America, which is some group that they've tried to organize. I don't have an assessment of it. Maybe one of you do. I'll end with this. It's not about, this is Trumpka, it's not about us saying, here's what we've got to do. The unprecedented part of this is that in the past we looked internally. How do we change? Now we have to look externally at the unemployed, at rank and file people, at students, at seniors. We have to go to the campus and ask, what do we do to have them all in our tent? So it sounds pretty good. But there's one big problem. It's form. It's very good. And, the AFL-CIO is organizing a big, important convention in September in Los Angeles. And we'll find out more about it, and maybe we'll take our campaign there too. But as good as this is, it's not an ideological break with capitalism or the institutions of capitalism like the Democratic Party. It's not that yet, and it won't be for a long time, and it's highly unlikely if that's going to come from the top. But it does show that things are opening up. I'm going to leave it at there. There's so much more that I could say and that people would want to say, but we'll continue discussion tomorrow. And in many ways, I think in all of the classes that the comrades on the Education Committee are preparing for us. Thank you.